Good evening. Welcome to Washington College's Tawes Auditorium, and welcome to WICOL's course, Meet Your Local Poets. I'm Howard McIntyre, facilitator of the course. During the next 6 weeks, I will be presenting to you 6 award-winning local poets. You will first meet them through an interview, then hear them read poetry from their published and yet to be published works, and finally have an opportunity to ask questions of them. As a WICOL class, we have the enrolled class, which is the group that's here this evening, and these are the people who are enrolled in the course, and we have invited Washington College students, guests, and members from the greater Kent County community, and I welcome you all here for this presentation this evening. The WICOL program, Washington College Academy of Lifelong Learning, is now in its 20th year of partnership with Washington College. Education and learning is live and well here in Kent County. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first poet guest and my friend, Dawn Miller. I first met Dawn through another of her passions, photography. She and her husband, Bob, are both teachers for the WICOL program, and both are award-winning photographers. They are perennial winners of the local Arts League photography contest. Dawn's photography, like her poetry, has great insight, depth of field, and composition. Many of our poets have multiple talents, and Dawn is no exception. In addition to her poetry, she is a classically trained flutist. She also has ridden dressage, she gardens, and travels again with her husband Bob to exotic places to take exquisite photography. They make me a very covetous man. I am also a photographer, but I can't touch a thing that they do. Dawn L.C. Miller has been writing poetry for over 30 years. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Fine Arts and Humanities from Slippery Rock College in Pennsylvania. All of the local poets have connections with Washington College. Dawn has a master's degree of arts and literature from Washington College. She teaches poetry courses for the WICOL program. Her course, The Joy of Poetry, is very informative and entertaining and interactive. It's designed to painlessly teach and enjoy poetry. I urge those of you who haven't taken a course with Dawn to take it. I've taken the course twice, and I plan to take it again this fall. Before I embarrass Dawn any further, I'd like to present her to you. And Dawn, if you'll come join us.
Don't believe anything he said. Okay.
Dawn, welcome to our Meet the Local Poets.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a wonderful honor.
Oh, great. I thought we'd kick it off with some of your early remembrances, your early education, your childhood background that fostered all these talents, your dressage, your poetry writing, your photography. All of these things certainly were cultured or enculturated in that cradle. So yeah. I'd like to hear from you as to where all that came from.
Oh, well, I started out in poetry in the same place I started out with horses. Dressage, by the way, is the classical riding that they do at the Spanish riding school. That's the white stallions. And both these things were furthered by this wonderful book. When I was a child, now I'm 62, so this was in the olden days. Okay, the best loved poems of the American people. It just caught my attention. And my house was filled with poetry. My parents were both of an older generation, and they had been raised up memorizing poems in school. So literature and poetry particularly was around the house, and this was lying around, and I found it. And in there's this wonderful poem called The Arab's Farewell to His Horse, which I will not attempt to read. It's long and wonderful, and every little horse-loving girl should read it if she hasn't already. And the other things, this book was full of all sorts of poems. The things that aren't necessarily thought about today by the Academy. This is full of poems that actually rhyme, where the words are delicious. And there was one in particular here, It Couldn't Be Done. If I could read it? Just one verse, and you'll see what caught me as a child. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say so till he'd tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Now that's got to have something to it. Here's language, it's music, it's rhythm, it's juiciness, there's a plot going on, there's story, there's all sorts of stuff going on in that thing. And it caught me. And I went around memorizing that one. I didn't have many friends. But this was the kind of thing. This book is full of all these things. Casey at the Bat, all those old things. And some are really well thought of. You know, the Invictus is in here. But what it introduced me to was language. And as I proceeded through school, I discovered that English, whether it's your native language or if it's your second language, has a million words just for you. And they can all be used, and they're rich, and they sound, and they feel good in the mouth, and they're full of descriptions. You know, every word is a little box with meanings inside it, and you can open them up if you use poetry, because poetry is to language as jazz is to music. Poetry is where you're inventing things, you're exploring things, and you're communicating things. And you can tell that I think poems should reach the reader and the listener. And then if there are multiple levels, this just makes it a better and better poem. But I don't think, this is my prejudice, I don't think obscurity and an element of being incomprehensible is a good thing in a poem. I think a poem should reach you and bring images into your head and make you think and feel. And it should feel good when you recite it. Harold Bloom, the critic, said that you should recite. You should get a poem and memorize it and recite it. I think he did the one about Odysseus talking to himself, you know, which was very good. So that's where I started off, and it proceeded through an English major in college, and I got worse and worse and worse, and wrote more, and I started writing, and I wrote more and more, and I've decided that to be a poet, you don't have to be published. What you have to do is write poetry, read poetry, and learn about poetry, because it's one of my pet peeves here. I once heard someone tell me that unless you're published, you're not a poet. And in the process of becoming published, I learned the difference. As a poet, you're creating something. That's your inner artist speaking, and your artist is in charge. After the artist has put something on the paper, then your editor comes in and points out what's, you know, spelling or punctuation, and then the artist says, I want it that way, and the editor has to leave. And then your inner critic comes in and says, oh, it's a poem about love. Well, Shakespeare wrote a lot of those. You might review some of those that he wrote. And then the critic has to leave, because the critic is the one who puts it into perspective. And then you say, okay, artist, work with what they said. And now you've got your poem. Now, maybe you find a place that might look like they would be interested. So suddenly you have to dismiss your artist and bring your editor and your critic back in to shape it so you can put it in an envelope with a stamp and send it to someone else to see if he can put it in his creation. When you're trying to publish something, you're in business, and that's different from the artistic impulse. So this is my perspective on things. You're a poet if you're writing poetry, reading it and learning about it. But you're in business when you put it in an envelope and send it to an editor, because I've edited a little newsletter, and I know that you get a lot of things and then you just pick and choose and you create something. And the publication is the creation of the editor. It's not your creation.
We've had a conversation, you and I, about poetry and a lot of what you just shared with us. And I'd like to take another step back. You went to Slippery Rock, you came to Washington College, and in both you were involved in language and training. And how did that formal training, sometimes formal training kind of interferes with that muse and that spontaneity that you seem to have. And I think in our conversation you talked about knowing the rudiments, the rules, so to speak, and knowing creative and artistically, but then knowing how to go about breaking those rules in kind of an accepted way. So did you find your education hampering or helping, and in what ways were they helpful, in what ways hampering?
I think that my education, am I still,
yes.
Is this, okay. I think that my education began with this book, and so with this enthusiasm in the background, a lot of this turns out to be formal poetry. It has rhyme, it has meter. So I wasn't scared of that. And when I went to college and I encountered things like blank verse and free verse, this just added. I was fortunate to get into some English programs that were very nurturing in all ways and did not direct me away from, say, formal poetry. And I did encounter the idea that formal poetry can be not acceptable for certain magazines, for certain publications. They want only free verse. Okay. But then I also encountered some others that only want. Two of my poems were published in The Well-Tempered Sonnet. When it comes to my educational background, I think that I just embraced, and I took it to be as a situation where I should learn everything I possibly can about it, that everything was good, that language was what it was all about. I did get very tired of free verse, and I looked into it, and I began to understand that if poetry is the jazz of language, every jazz musician knows all of his scales, all of his keys. He knows all his sharps, all his flats. He knows all his arpeggios and all his thirds. Whether he reads music or not is not important, but he knows these things because he has to improv within those things with other people. And so if you're going to write free verse, it helps you to write some sonnets, to try a villanelle, to try a sestina. Even if you don't think your attempts are very good, you need to try these things. Read some. Get the language and the way it works internalized. And so I was able to choose classes. I was just lucky, for one thing, and I was able to choose classes that were very accepting of whatever kinds of poetry I wished to investigate and to explore. So I guess that's it there.
Yeah, I know that in our conversations, again, this whole business of formal poetry, sonnets, sestinas, the more formal things, I know in your writing in particular, your first book, I think about half of those poems are sonnets.
I had sonnetitis for a while.
Right. And I think, what was it, Pegasus Feathers,
Oh, yes.
Anam, Cara, Mea Culpa, Daughters, among others. And then you, in your second book, The Moon, The Menhir, and The Memory, which you published in 2004, that was for the most part free verse.
Yes, I moved to feeling confident with free verse. I felt that I discovered with sonnets that I was rhyming the same words over and over. I said, okay. And so I explored blank verse and free verse as a way of breaking out of that. And I felt that the background of the more formal, demanding sonnet helped create free verse that had meaning and still kept a sense of rhythm and the juiciness that is language. I'm beginning to sound like an expert, and I'm not one.
Well,
okay. Don't.
I think Dawn, like most of modern poets, writes in free verse. Without exception, I think the majority of what we're seeing in modern poetry is free verse. And I guess we have Walt Whitman to thank for this. In Leaves of Grass, he kind of threw the shackles off and made it very acceptable to write in free verse form. That's not to say that there isn't still very good poetry being written in formal sense.
Oh, yes.
And I love the sonnets that you wrote.
Well, thank you.
The other day at the Lit House, I heard a young poet, I can't think of her first name, Beasley, who wrote one of the most beautiful sestinas that I've written sestinas, and you know
yes, 39 lines.
Right,
yes.
39 lines, 6 words that are repetitive, and when you're writing them at first, it becomes a very formulaic sort of thing and seems to be forced.
Right.
But hearing her sestina with the enjambments and all, it just one line went into the other just so beautifully.
Yes, that is a strong
Have you
thing.
experimented with those?
Yes, I have written several sestinas. Some of them, as you say, are difficult because the end word has to be woven just so.
Almost contrived.
And when you find a subject that is very repetitive, like ocean waves or pilgrims coming to the sacred Lourdes fountain, something repetitive that can be repeated in new ways with every stanza. That really helps. I have been writing a lot of free verse, and I still do some formal now and then. So, what's the next question?
When you put a collection together, I want to talk about several things. Number one, putting a collection together, the relationship of poem to poem. I know in your poems, like many poetry books, you have sectioned off, and why it's sectioned in the way it is. Some poetry books, it's just one poem after another. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason. But it seems with your poetry that there does tend to be a general overview of what I'm reading there.
I try to go from the first poem to the last with a theme that is almost a story arc. And there, in Moon, Menhir, and the Memory, there was a break, as if it was a past and then a present. So it was, actually there were three breaks, because the Memory is the last one. And it was, that was a difficult book to put together. I try to gather things that will have some meaning that connects one to another, whether it's an overview of family or if it's a mood, like sadness. So, yeah.
I know in the course that you were teaching, one of the last assignments that we had, which was given to us the first day, was to come up with a definition of poetry. And I carried on that tradition in each of the classes that I taught. Remember, we started
Yes.
collecting this.
Yes.
And I think I now have about a 30-page document
Oh, that's wonderful.
with definitions of poetry, different poets, people from the classes, and so forth. And I think, again, in The Moon, the Menhir, and the Memory, Dawn wrote a poem called Poem, and I think it speaks pretty much to this and speaks to you about as a poet and where some of this stuff is coming from.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Poem. The poem stands aloft, waiting to see if I will hear it. The poem waits in the tide, sluicing with the seaweed in and out for my mermaid hair to tangle in it. The poem is smoke in the air choking my lungs. The poem is a child's crying laugh long ago at something that seemed funny and a little scary. The poem is touching the keys or the sand or the bread slice. Fingertip skin sliding over the surfaces, gritty with messages that float up the arms into the brain and hover there just beyond words. The poem is searching in the dark, murky, empty. What'll we do about the electronics?
We're still good?
Nothing was changed and it went back on itself.
It sounds much better after that.
Oh, good.
Not during that was a good thing.
Okay.
So I'd say to Mary and Kalina,
Okay.
who are two of our classmates who are also currently writing poetry. I don't know where your muse comes from or where your ideas, but I think, like most poets, these things come from all different directions. That's why I asked Dawn if she would read that poem.
they do
I think it speaks pretty well to that.
Yeah.
Dawn also, in her poetry, has a certain bit of wit, quite a lot of wit, as a matter of fact, and also irony. And with that, I'd like you to read Purposes, if you will.
Oh, yes. Okay. I guess I didn't finish, by the way, before I read Purposes. Talking about my progression into poems, I wound up with Wallace Stevens, and I highly recommend it. This is wonderful. One of his most important poems for me was Of Mere Being. So that finishes my education.
Okay.
Since then, it's been learning a lot. Now, Purposes. Deep in the South Atlantic lay a beach of cold sand. A tern, sleek, white, and black, arrow-tipped wings and needles' tails swiping, remembering desperately the soar, the infinite spaces between clouds over rollers deep below, jet streaming, airlifting feathers on face, nape, shoulders rising in beats. The tern, shocked with pain, hobbled, panicked, from the clicking legs and raised claws coming. The tern lay in brief agony under the surgery of crabs, then flew off in death. Sometimes it is the infinite sky. Sometimes crabs eat well. And I believe that that poem was probably influenced by Wallace Stevens' Of Mere Being, which is also about death.
When I read, as I have read so many of Dawn's things, it blows me away. I mean, I'm a would-be poet, and I keep trying to attain those heights and get that symbolism, get that motion, get those feelings, and then that neat little twist of irony in this particular poem. It just really grabbed me. I'd like to finish off one more point before we get to your actual reading portion.
Okay.
And again, I'm going back to the process. A lot of poets have different processes that they use. Some people, and I'm sure like those of us who are more amateur in our ways, we kind of wait for these things to come to us, or we try to manufacture something, while others have a more formalized, get up in the morning, start at 8 o'clock, and work a half day, 3 days a week or something like that. So you have a whole range of how people come at it. And I was curious just as what your writing process was.
Well, my writing process started off with do a poem every day, whether it's good or not. And that works for months at a time until it breaks down. But then I pick it up again. And it works to just sit down, do a poem every day, no matter how bad. And you can do a little journaling on the side or the grocery list or whatever. But do a poem every day, no matter how bad. And the idea is that it can't get better if it doesn't exist. And it can't be good if it hasn't gotten better. And it can't be great if it hasn't been good. But at first, it has to exist. And in order to make it exist, I give myself the commitment of a beautiful blank book. No loose leaf pages, nothing I can change a whole lot, a blank book. And I get myself the most expensive, wonderful pen that I can afford. And it's a fountain pen. So there's no erasures. So you got this expensive blank book and a pen, and you put the things together, those two, and you let it come, and you feel something, and you let the words come, and they begin to talk. You begin to talk onto the page, and you begin to see things coming together, and you think about, well, what is this like? What is this like? What does this remind me of? Is there a connection between this daffodil and that withered rose? What is the connection here? And you let the connections happen, and you get a poem, and it's bad, but it's okay. And then I can go from there, having made that commitment, that initial creative act, without anything going back, without anything changing along the way. You can scratch things out, but that's it. No erasures. The commitment to the initial creative act is what I want. And then I take that, give it a few days, and put it into the computer, switch around, create a few files, print it off now and then. And when the blank book is filled, it gets a date on it, and it goes up on a shelf. And my initial, original effort is preserved for me. So no matter what kind of rewrite I do, I don't lose the original vision, whatever it was, no matter how bad. And it's okay if it's bad. That's the thing. You cannot be creative if you are afraid to fail. You have to have a whole bushel full of failures before you get one that is worth working on to make it better. But that one might wind up in an envelope going to a magazine. So don't fail. Don't worry about it. You can only succeed if you're doing the creative act. So that's my process, and it's very slow and disjointed. After I start printing them off in the computer, then I collect them in a file, the rough draft copies that have gone into the computer. Okay, and then I take them to Staples and I just bind them on alphabetical order so that I can't lose them. So that's my method.
Wow. Now, you've had a couple of your poems, more than a couple, that you've submitted to various either publishers or contests or magazines, and you've had some success with that. And I mention this because, like I say, we do have a couple active writers in the audience and who are curious about, that outlet, that recognition of work and so forth. Could you tell us a little bit about your submission, the process,
I'm very random when it comes to finding things. See, when you create, and that's your artist, and you have your editor and you have to write and then listen to the voices in your head. And the first voice is your artist, and that one is absolute. The second is your editor, and the third is your critic. And the editor tends to little details like spelling, and the critic puts it in perspective. Well, when you've created something and you think, oh, well, maybe this would be pretty good. You've read it aloud several times in your room when no one else is listening. And you've possibly read it to a friend or whatever, and you think it might have some potential. Then you do something called marketing. I'm very bad at that. The back end of certain writers' magazines, like The Writer and Poets and Writers, have listings where people are, publications are looking for poems for submission. And then there's the Writer's Digest Poets and Writers Market. I do that. Every other year I buy that and I wander through it looking for something that might remind me of one of my poems. And then I try to bring the two together, and I go on their website, always go on their website to see who they are. Always, you can't always read a copy, but if you can, that's great. When you're looking for magazines, you need to go on the website to make sure that the editor listed in the writer's market is still the same editor, because there's a big changeover in the business. Publishing is a business, and when you're marketing your work, that's being a business person. And you have to think of your poem as a product that you're trying to sell, even if it's for, contributors' copies. You're still trying to place it in a marketplace. And you have to remember that the editor is going to receive lots of submissions. That's a significant word. You're submitting your work. And that's the opposite of what your artist does, because your artist is like a god or goddess. They're in charge. But when you're submitting to an editor, that's where you're going to kowtow and submit. And you need to fit your work into theirs, and then they decide, that editor will decide if it fits in his creative work, which is the publication. So it's two different mindsets, and I'm not very good at the business end.
And then the other thing that you have to come to grips with is exception and accepting, or being accepted and rejected. And believe me, you're going to be rejected more often than you're accepted. And you have to learn to live with that. And I think in a lot of cases, especially if you enter into contests, you'll find that being subjective and being judged material, a lot of times you never know the criteria that they're using, and you don't get a lot of feedback. So you have to kind of live with that as a reality as well. Right. And without beating that to death here, right, I think we need to get to the meat of the program, and that is, you've already heard her already, Dawn is probably one of the most energetic. I never cease to enjoy listening, not only to her speaking, but to her, the reading of her poetry. And again, I'll put in another plug for her course, because each week in Dawn's course, she will look at a different aspect of poetry. She'll look at a different grouping of poetry. She may have a few different assignments for the class, but all in all, it's a very, very enjoyable experience. And I always really enjoy listening to you read. So
thank you very much.
If you will grace us now with...
That's just inflating my head. It's just, you shouldn't say those things. You'll never get rid of me. Well, one of the things I was going to read was, you gave me hints. You sent me an email with questions and hints, and so I got prepared. Yeah. So one of the things that I've always, this was one of my earlier poems, but I felt that it was profound for me. It has a lot of meaning. Souls. Sometimes the soul is wounded so deep early it cannot heal in a lifetime. A sapling, cleft, can only grow around the blow. Curling bark covers the oozing sap, a century passing, so an old tree stands warped and bent as a cleft sapling. The gaze lies idly on it, and curious fingers poke the bark where trickling ooze wets a mark where the stroke fell deep long ago. So souls stand sometimes, hissing their stories to the lonely air, bearing their aged wounds. So, thank
lovely.
you. This was the third of my self-published books, and I am currently working with CreateSpace, that's Amazon.com, to produce another one called Out of the Basement. And it's, do I have that? It's, where do I have that?
Well, she's looking for it. That's one
I
of my
have
favorite. When I heard that in her
Basement.
class, it just knocked me away.
I
And
have it in here.
this is part of the new book that you're going to be publishing.
Yes. You see the advantage of putting all your rough drafts. Respect your rough draft. It's your original. And no matter how bad. And these are all rough drafts. These are hardly worth, anything at all. But, you rework it and rework it. But that's important. Keep your rough drafts. Don't throw away your writings. I once met a poet who did that. I couldn't understand. He said, I threw away all my poetry and started over.
Oh, wow.
He was 30 years old. Come on now. Yeah. Out of the basement. Only once in a dwindling lifetime will a ray of sunlight slip through the basement's gritty window. Once a pebble will crack the pane. Take it then. Take it. Slip out through the crack. Grab the air, clutch at the sunlight's tail before it can set. Tear your flesh on the broken glass in your freeing. It is worth the blood.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Let's see. I had, there were a couple of let's see, who have I got here? Heritage, the Drought. Here we are. There was one sonnet that I enjoyed writing this. And it was prompted by a trip to Ireland. And in Ireland, I found a lot of other Americans. And many of them were decked out in shamrocks. And some of them had already acquired various plaids and sweaters and even later hosen, because they were also not only Irish, they were also German. And I thought about, what in the world do people think of us? How could I explain this to people in other countries? This phenomenon that we Americans do, we seek our heritage. So this is, the Chesapeake does not flow in my blood. The white cascades do not uplift my heart. So long ago, my people crossed the flood of ocean currents, kept themselves apart. From sea to tidal sea they spread away, and post and rail and air were seldom done to reunite the scattered, make them stay. In settling everywhere, they settled none. Detritus from the moving trembled down. Their songs and tales spin-drifted into silence. 1,000 years of legends and renown discarded for a new-made social balance. New lands bring forth new wonders, crops that pay. I wonder what I lost along their way.
Wow.
So perhaps that's why we do things like that. And I did it. I bought some sweaters.
Now that was the gift of writing a sonnet, 14-line poem, rhyming verse, and I was sitting here not hearing the mechanics of a sonnet. I was not hearing the rhyme. I mean, the rhyme was there, but the flow, the enjambment, the continuity of it was just so elegant.
Well, thank you.
Very
That one was published in The Well-Tempered Sonnet, which is a small literary magazine that does only sonnets. And so I was very pleased to be accepted. One of the poems that I've written that is blank verse represents one of the themes that I find myself writing about over and over, and that is our relationship to nature. This has been a continual theme that surfaces over and over again in my poems, no matter how bad they are. And this one has been published. The drought. The rain came plunging, drenching after drought, and silence burst as sensual, groaning frogs, released at once from dry, insisted sleeps, began the rhythms sounded so beneath the world's first trees, bromeliads and palms, embraced their roots in water filled with songs, but long ago. Tonight in twilight I am standing at the edge of time and pond, peering like a primate at the sounds that pulse and surge from shadowed reeds and roots. Somehow the blood and feet take up the beat, but on the edge of plunging I retreat, withdrawing from the memories of bones to faintly hear within our walls their songs. This happened in the spring one year when we on the eastern shore have all the peepers and the other frogs come out, and by our property we have a bog. Everyone should have a bog near the property. And it was filled with all these frogs. It was wonderful. And I went out, and it was twilight, and I stood there, and I looked at them. You could see a couple of them in the dimness with their little throats bulging forward and back. And it was glorious. And I thought, oh, wow. So I came in, and I wrote a couple of poems, renditions of this. And it's always reminded me of that. But I didn't plunge into the bog. I went into the house. So, anyway.
Did you want to just say a little bit about blank verse as opposed to the sonnet that you read before? You notice
yes.
there was no rhyme in blank verse.
Right.
So.
Well, blank verse is iambic pentameter, 5 feet per line, and it's iambic. I am, and it's but there's no rhyme, and you can carry it on as far as you want to, 20 lines, 40 or 10, and it doesn't have an end rhyme, although you might have alliteration, and like in tonight in twilight, I. You can do everything you want to do with it, but there's no rhyme. So, there.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to hear any more?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, bless
We
your
do
heart.
want to hear more.
How many more do you want to hear?
Well, we have a few minutes left here
Okay.
before we open it to the question and answers.
Oh, okay. Well then, perhaps this is one that it's going to be published in the new book. I'm 62 this year, and that's a new thing. And I've had hip replacements, and I'm just a brand new grandmother. And so the process of life, of aging, and of the good things and the negatives of aging have begun to surface in my poems. The truth. It is the soft tread of years that waits upon the landing. The wind, ever young, never brings this news. The sun betrays us all into optimistically rising. The green earth renews each spring, but the moon now, dreaming, never lies. Cool, pale, unchanging color shifts only by shadows curving, metrically complete. New never, but only crescent. Full never, but only round. It is the dreaming moon upon the landing, whispering of gray years. This one has a little touch of humor. Do you want a last one?
Sorry?
This one has a little touch of humor. Would you like a last one?
A last one?
Yep, last one, and then open up for questions if you want.
Well, we have a little time yet.
Oh, okay, no problem at all.
Go ahead with reading.
What
By
would
the
you
way,
like to
while
hear?
she's doing
What would you
that,
like to hear? Anything?
these are the 3 published books that Dawn has, and she's going to speak to that a little later, but believe me, it's delightful reading, as you can tell.
Thank you.
I can't read in my head what I'm hearing when Dawn reads, but it is delightful stuff.
Well, thank you. I am going to read something out of this then. One of, as I said, the relationship of us to nature is one of my themes that comes forward. Also, there's a certain kind of question of morality in our relationship to nature, here and there. And every now and then, that surfaces. Window glass jarred at the sudden thrust. On the lawn center by the bench, a sharp-shinned hawk sat mantling her catch. A grackle lay stunned under her slender talons. An hour before, the grackle had stood on the feeder, gazing and daring all comers. His was the seed, the perch, the sun, his shining yellow eye. His the muted rainbow moving on his neck feathers, an avian auroral display. Now the sharpshin's eye held the sun's gleam and me, before she took flight with her prey hanging beneath her. Below them I waited, a ghost to complete the trinity, wondering which one to bless. That was called The Hawk and the Blackbird. And that was actually something that happened, because I feed birds, and I have feeders all around the house, so that if a hawk comes, she only catches what she would normally catch, so in the woods. Because if they see the hawk coming, and she'll sit and wait, the birds go around to the back of the house where they can feed over there. So,
I had Lynn, my wife, who would have been here with us this evening. She called me down at Eastern Neck Wildlife Refuge one day. I was doing some volunteer work out there, and she called just crying like a baby. And she said, "Howie," she said, what can I do? What can I do? This bird came in and swiped a bird right off of the feeder, and the sharpshin had, I think it was either sharpshin or Cooper's, I'm not sure which from her description, but at any rate, he snatched up the bird, and then he had the audacity to go that much further, to fly off beyond our garage, perch in a tree, and decided to eat the bird right then and there, which obviously was...
But that means that that particular species is a little stronger, because the others of that breed will be more alert. And one of the things you do is you put feeders all around the house, so that they can, they're very good. They know, and they all live together.
Right.
We've been to the Galapagos, and we had to face this as well. We saw the predator-prey relationship there very distinctively. Giving your birds a lot of different environments to feed and to have water, to have shelter, and to have open space, then you're creating a natural environment where they can exist.
And again, to our poets in the audience, everything out there is fodder for poetry. I think a poet is a person, well, in Dawn's case, being a photographer, I think you have such a keen eye for detail, and I don't know which affects which. I know as a photographer, you know, framing and catching the motion, looking at the detail, and then I think a person who is a photographer comes across with that type of poetry so much more exquisitely than one who doesn't have that, who is not an artist, because they have that extra eye for detail.
You may very well be right. I do know that my poems affect my photos and vice versa. One of the things that we have, of course, is the bird feeder right outside the window, so we can take pictures of birds lots, including lots of cardinals. I don't know why, but this year our house was a place where cardinals convened. But I wrote this one, Faith. The cardinals in the weeping tree expect an appearance each new day. Traffic and dogs are too far for concern. The orange beaks gape yawning. The black masks conceal only the tiny eyes, dots shiny and without sympathy. The cardinals wait in doubtful anticipation, fully cognizant of human unreliability. When I manifest with seed, they flee the miracle like Thomas, returning where I have passed over for communion only after the coming. The cardinals are particularly shy. They do not trust you. Your chickadees will get very friendly, though.
Absolutely.
So, perhaps, how's our time?
You good. A couple more.
Long, short?
Long and short, that's fine.
Okay. Let's see, where's my photo from the wall? I found a photograph looking through my parents' things. And it turned out to be a photograph of my father's friend, whom I didn't know he had, from the war. And on the back of that photograph was written just one word, return. Oh. Photograph from the war. Abandoned attic albums yield a photograph embracing shadows of a faded, distant garden, holding forth a wall and bench, a seated friend who, smiling into distance, folds his hands. Return is written on the browning sheet recording war, their uniforms complete with medals absolution. Resolved into the distant trees in absolution, dull, shadowed bronze horizon scars the photograph and leaves the listener waiting for the hiss of war while hearing all too close the dry and rustling garden. What ways did father come among them, all return the scene into the exploration of the friend? He waits, unnamed, with slick black hair, a foppish friend who sits in wicker, knee on knee for absolution. What might occur from whither wandered minds return? A flagrant yearning seems composed this photograph, perhaps at whim, within the walled and whitewashed garden. Encircling distance hints a darker wall of war. While startled, shortened moments make the life of war, some comfort found in closing, chaste, pursuing friend, accepting simple, strange enfoldments in the garden, makes a wonderment of further absolution. In newsreel footage hides a hinting photograph, and old newspapers fade, so glossing the return. When troops amass for battle, guessing no return, and chance becomes a bullet flinging out of war, young men seek yearning captured, grasp a photograph, confirming that a life was lived beside a friend. And friends, no censure show, no needed absolution, no bloody deeds or frightened failures haunt the garden. So faded paper holds a man within a garden, and like the word below his image, his return is all remaining of the viewer's absolution, of bullets, blood, and all intangibles of war. A question stays unanswered of this father's friend, and facts meander misting in a photograph. So fades a garden closed by walls that shutter war. For many years, return has waited for his friend, my father's absolution in a photograph.
Wow. Just one word on the back of a photograph. Wow.
That was actually a sestina. Overheard by the gate. I did not think they would take it on like that, to strive so hard to fulfill every letter on the stones. I gave them instincts, promptings, like all my children of fin and fur, of flight and standing. Surely, I thought, they could hear my voice clearly in these. What further guidance would they need? But someone overheard me one day muttering by myself, and he took it on stone, half done. They needed more after that, and suddenly fits of prophecy took my daydreams and ran with them into the sandy desert. When the towns became too small, they built cities and passed judgments, speaking strange words from books they ascribed to me. I am the rays of the sun, blessing earth or burning. I am sorry for that bush, by the way. And I am the moon that keeps all time. No thing contains me. I am that I am. It is far too simple to cut my forests down for ink and pages. Let my trees and children grow.
Don?
Thank you.
That concludes the reading portion of the program. I had an advantage sitting here because I could kind of peek over at what Dawn was reading, and the Sestina, which was the poem that she read next to last, I could see that it was in 6-line groupings, and I quickly looked to the last line and saw the three-line. I forget the name of the final 3 lines of the poem. Again, for the benefit of those of you who aren't familiar with the Sestina form, it's a 39-line poem with a selection of 6 words that you word kind of in a formulaic way. And I won't go into the details on that, but each of those words has to be used. Some people cheat and use variations on the word, but those 6 words are used throughout the 6 verses, and then 3 of those words are used to summarize the poem more or less in the last 3 lines. Cynthia. It's called a sestina, and I guess that's Spanish for 6.
Sestina. I'm not sure which language. Sestina. Sestina.
Sestina.
Yeah. And it's kind of a fun form, but it will make you tear your hair out. What I would do is I would do 1 stanza, because it comes out with 6 stanzas, and then there's the 3 lines at the end. So 6 stanzas, each one of 6 lines, and I would work on 1 stanza each day, and that was about all I could stomach. And so then it would come together. And you have to decide ahead of time what your meter is going to be, if it's going to have a meter, and if it is going to be a meter. 4 lines is very, it is too short. It'll be jumpy. 5 lines is iambic pentameter, and that makes a very nice, 5 beats per line makes a very nice rhythmic thing. I think I chose 6 beats per line so that it would be more conversational. So these are the things you think about.
So we're now into we've already entered the question-answer portion. So if you have any questions, what we'll do is we don't have the advantage of putting mics out there with you all. So if you ask a question, I'll repeat the question for the benefit of the camera and also clarity of the class, and then Dawn will proceed to answer.
I'll try to stay on topic. I'll try to answer without digression.
Okay, while we're perking in the class, I'd like to come back to the forms. I know in the books that I've read of yours, obviously that first one, as I said, was about half of those or more were sonnets,
yes,
and some very, very well-crafted sonnets. The others primarily were free verse. Have you experimented with things like pantoum?
Yes. Oh, I had lots of fun with a pantoum.
Again, let's explain a pantoum, and then
a pantoum is I believe it's a Maori construction, and it is meant to be done as a group effort around a campfire, where you start a line, and then the next person builds a line, the third person has to repeat plus build, and it's one of those that goes around the campfire that way, and it's a fun kind of thing. Now, it can drive you nuts. If I have,
while she's looking up the pantoum that she's going to read, this is a poem. When you're doing field work, a lot of these forms came out of field work, and with the pantoum, there's repeating lines. You'll hear what's it, the
The
first line and the third line.
And then you have to, they shift back and forth.
And then the
second,
first
fourth.
line goes to the last line of the poem, no matter how long it is.
Right.
These can be as long or as short as you care for them to be, but the first line becomes the last line of the poem, and then you'll hear lines repeated throughout.
Yes.
And so in essence, what you're doing when you write a pantoum is you're writing half the lines
Right.
again.
Right, and in Maori society, you would be around the campfire or at work. I think this was one of the campfire ones. You would have to remember things and relate them. And this built community and society, and it built, you know, all sorts of things in your brain. It exercised your brain bone, and you know, this is the kind of thing we ought to be doing today. Moving. Oh, by the way, I should tell you the background. This is about a friend of mine who was moving, and she was not moving very far. She and her husband were just moving across town. And so they didn't hire a moving van. They just got a little thing they were going to drive, and then they got friends like us to bring our cars. And all of her plants, she had lots, each one with a drippy little saucer, and they all had to go in my car. And so anyway, this was what came out of the experience of moving this young couple, and their dear friends still are, moving a pantoum. Detritus shingles down by grain and grain. Do we have all we need and want today? The furniture has slowly gathered stains. But do we have all items in array? Do we have all we need and want today? The moving van goes open in the rain. But do we have all items in array? The men begin to carry it away. The moving van goes open in the rain. The weatherman said it might snow today. The men begin to carry it away. The snow and rain persist. It's all in vain. The weatherman said it might snow today. The truck is full and now begins to sway. The snow and rain persist. It's all in vain. The road is opening the end of day. The truck is full and now begins to sway. The furniture has slowly gathered stains. The road is opening the end of day. Detritus shingles down by grain and grain.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So,
Do we have other questions from the class or the audience? Yes.
Okay, even though I write myself, I wanted to know, like, what exactly, when you said that you write a poem a day, whether it's good or bad, like, I'm stuck, I would say, like, writing in the same, like, kind of, short stanza. I don't want to know how, like, longer, I feel like the longer I write, I lose the message. Like, how do you come out of that to fit, like,
Okay, the essence of your question then, I guess, is how do you break out of a kind of a writing rut that you're in, a form, and then extend it without losing what it is that you're essentially trying to say? Okay.
remember that Shakespeare's sonnets, go look up his sonnets, all of them, the first 10 are about just one topic. And I keep remembering this and looking at, he's written over 100 sonnets, and they are all basically about the same thing. So and I have experienced this myself a lot, you keep writing over the same kind of topic, the same kind of form, over and over. The only way out is through. You have to do it all. Just do it as much as you can. Increase production, and then try taking a look. If you feel like you're saying it too fast, it's short, it's right there. Kind of like that little poem, Out of the Basement. I thought, it's short, where does it go? But then I read it in front of other people and they understood it. I said, oh, it only needs to be short. So that can be happening. Also, if your short poems are on the same topic, can you combine them? Do they make stanzas? Are you writing a stanza a day of a longer poem? Possible. Let your artist free. Just let them free. trust the process and respect the rough draft, even if it looks awful. You know, you write it and then you say, oh, this is terrible. Just let it be. Walk away from it and come back and it'll look a lot better.
Tell you what I've done very often is taking a lot of, I do a lot of haiku writing in tanka. And what I'll do is either take the tanka or haiku and then build that into a larger poem, or reverse the process, take one of my longer poems and see if I can really boil it down to the essence of a haiku. And I think, I don't know, that to me is
That's a wonderful
light
idea.
exercise. And another thing, when you're, I don't want to get too technical in this, but when you start writing sonnets, there are different forms of sonnets and different approaches to going about a sonnet. And a lot of times, if you're writing a sonnet to tell a story, so to speak, you might want to build that story so that you take the first 4 lines of your sonnet and tell a certain aspect of that story, then develop that a little bit further, and then at the end you develop it one step further, and then the last 2 lines you come back
That's
and
where
you
you
nail
tie
it. And
Yeah.
you know, if you notice what Dawn has done, she'll write that thing in those first 12 lines. You've got this whole thing going, and then if you read those second line, the real skill is to turn those last 2 lines into something that says, wow, that's what that poem was about. That's what that poem said.
Sometimes those are the 2 lines that come first. The yes at the end, and then you build toward that. Every now and then that happens. So trust the artist within.
Yeah.
Turn your artist loose in the 1 million words in the English language and enjoy language.
If I understood that correctly, just so we're clear on that, I think what you said was you write those last 2 lines first in the writing process, and that's what you're going to end with, those 2 lines that you wrote in the beginning. That's one technique to get to that point.
In writing a sestina, that helps a lot. The last 3 lines at the end where you have to use the words you've chosen, write that first, and that helps. But I think that knowing about formal poetry is important to being able to write free verse well, and to be able to appreciate free verse. And because a poet should write and read and learn. And that's being a poet.
And I think that is well said, and I think we're hitting the bewitching hour, and I know that there is a bus awaiting certain of our class, and unless there's anything pressing, and if you do have some individual questions, I'm sure that Dawn will be here to go further with that. And Dawn, once again, thank you so very much for being our guinea pig, the first one out. I think you did an extremely exquisite job. Thank you so very much.
I would like to thank you, Howard, really, and I'd like to thank you all for coming and being so patient and kind and listening and letting me talk. Thank you.